All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today for Cyber Defense with Dr. Dave Schippers and myself. I'm Dave Kelly, and thank you all for coming today. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of what's going on in the cyber world, like who is actually attacking us, and then provide you some practical things that you can do in your business to help mitigate that risk of a cyber incident. So first, just by way of introduction, so you know who you're talking to today. My name is Dave Kelly. I'm the co-founder and chief technology officer for SensCy. Just by way of background, and SensCy stands for Sensible Cyber. Just by way of background, spent 26 years with the Michigan State Police. I actually ran Cyber Command for them. Michigan was the first state in the nation to have a fully functioning cyber command center. So what does that mean? It means not only were we tasked with protecting the state's network, but we integrated the cyber command center into our intelligence center. And in those early days of cyber, we were going out, responding to incidents, anonymizing the data, and through our intel center, sharing it with our critical infrastructure partners to help them be more protected. From there, I went to work for a software company where I was really helping them build artificial intelligence and machine learning models around cyber data to make cyber analysts more proactive in their jobs because most of the time they were very reactive. They were looking at things like log files and things and sort of like looking at the log and determining it's something there as opposed to being alerted to when something could be a potential problem. So spent several years doing that, and through all of that, realized that small and medium-sized organizations were really left out when it came to cyber. The solutions, the tools were too expensive. It was too expensive to hire people, which really was the catalyst for starting SensCy. And as I mentioned, SensCy stands for Sensible Cyber, and we're really focused on that small and medium-sized organization, helping them mitigate their risk and providing them with an affordable solution to do so. So that's me. I'm also joined by Dr. Dave Schippers and very excited to have him here today. And I'll let him introduce himself and hand it off to you, Dr. Dave.
All right, thanks, Dave. Love the Dave squared thing, so it's always fun. I'll say when I get to work with another Dave, a lot of us are around, but you don't always get two of us in the same webinar, is what I'll say. So yeah, so my name is Dr. Dave Schippers. So I'm currently the vice president and dean of academics for Walsh College. I do still teach cyber. My background is, I'll say, I like to explain it as I'm not a typical academic. So I actually had 20, 30 years in industry, had different roles in that, including running IT and cyber teams. So that's part of my background. I also hold a professional investigator's license with the state of Michigan, have for a number of years, done things like digital forensics, some intel work, just different types of things, and on consulting. So have a lot of different perspectives that I kind of bring to the game. From a degree perspective, my background includes networking, intel, information systems management. And my doctorate is actually a doctorate of science in cybersecurity. So that's my research field. It was actually, my dissertation was in forensics. So I'll say, a nerd alert is probably the best thing to say when you take a look at all that. But so some of the highlights, I'll say, I'm going to talk most specifically on the academia side of the house. And that is, so have been heavily involved in updating and revamping our information technology programs. And then as well as our cybersecurity program, have helped work with others at the college. Really feel like in the last few years, we've amped those programs up. We'll talk a little bit later about, I'll say some of the really great rankings that we've had. We've also done things. We've moved in, from an innovation perspective, we saw that automotive cyber was going to be a big deal. We jumped into that, one of the first in the nation to jump on that as far as a degree concentration. So now, from a research perspective, I have worked with different groups. So, for instance, have done some research and publication with the Army's Ground Vehicle Systems Center, and that's on the cybersecurity side of the house as well as you can see, Automation Alley have done research and publications and peer review on multiple reports for them over the years, and also have a book out with some co-authors, The Force of Technology. Of course, I typically cover the cyber piece, so that's my role within that book, and usually do a lot of speaking, I'll say internationally, regionally, and locally as well within that cyber space. So that's kind of me. We'll jump in if we can go to the next slide. I'll say, I love to signpost, so we're going to tell you what we're going to tell you about today. So first up, we're going to get into current attack trends. So understanding what are some of the statistics, what are some of the things that are happening that you need to be aware of when you think about cyber. Then we're going to get into things like cyber best practices, especially focusing on small and medium-sized businesses. So if you're in that particular category or categories, you're going to want to, hear, hey, here's the things that you want to focus on to try to defend better. And then, of course, we're going to get into some things like resources and free things that you can take advantage of. We'll talk a little bit about the Walsh Cyber Program, and then we'll kind of wrap up for the day with some questions. So if we can move to the next slide again. All right, so we're going to get right into it. We're going to get into I'll call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're going to start with, I'll be frank, probably the bad and the ugly. And then we'll go from there. So can we go to the next slide, please? So first up, if you are a small and medium-sized business, all right, I will say the ostrich approach, which is I'm going to stick my head in the sand and pretend nothing is going to happen, is not a good approach. So what most people don't realize is, well, I'll say this, 54% of small businesses think they are too small for a cyber attack. All right. That is the typical perception, and that perception is wrong. 43% of cyber attacks are specifically targeted at small businesses. All right. 47% of the small businesses have fewer than 50 employees, and they have no cybersecurity budget. So here's the thing you need to understand. When the bad guys, I'll use the phrase, when the bad guys are sitting back going, who do I want to attack and how much effort do I want to put in? Okay, so let's be frank. Let's think about the psychology of the cyber gangs that are out there operating on the internet. If they were interested in hard work, they would be going to a 9 to 5 with the rest of us and trying to do things the right way, right? So they're not. So they want maximum cash for minimum effort, okay? So the very simple evaluation here is, if I go after a global organization with millions of dollars to invest in cyber and cybersecurity staff, it's gonna be a hard challenge. If I go after a small business with no budget, it's like shooting fish in a barrel for these people, okay? That's really how they view this, all right? And then 52% of small and medium-sized organizations actually don't have, so we're going to exemplify that a little bit more, don't have any IT or cyber employees or any particular partner with a focus on that. So you're kind of flying blind, is what I would argue, okay? Next up, I'll say some other interesting stats are basically 68% of small and medium-sized businesses, the owners and the executives never get a cyber briefing. So again, you're flying dark or flying blind here. And then, of course, I'll say many, so about half, roughly 47% of small and medium-sized businesses are not doing any cybersecurity awareness training for their employees. All right. So again, these are things that definitely can come back to bite you. Now, specifically, what you're seeing on screen is small and medium-sized businesses have seen a 424% increase in cyber attacks in 2023. All right, so this should tell you how focused they are on these particular segments or pillars, right? 82% of ransomware attacks involve companies with fewer than 1,000 employees. All right, and when we start talking about costs, some of these numbers on screen, depending on your business side, may seem like we're super high. Here's what you really need to take away, okay? One, if you have a cyber attack, one thing I will tell you, small and medium-sized businesses, if you were attacked, and I will tell you at some point you will be, 60% fold within 6 months of that attack, meaning you go out of business. All right, so many of you will only get one shot at dealing with this correctly, right? Now, from a breach detection time perspective, one of the things I would say is average breach times. And here's the bad news. I've been talking about average breach time for a number of years in my role. This number is going up. It's not going down. So that detection time, it should be going down. It's not. It's been going up slightly, which is not good. But think of it this way. If I break into your enterprise, I get into your equipment, how much of your stuff do you think that I can steal in 277 days? Pretty much all of it, right? I can do whatever I want within that time frame. I'm aware of businesses that had been breached for 5 years. They never knew it. And then when they went to sell their business, there was an assessment. They determined it had been there for 5 years. And in essence, the value of their business was, the deal was over. they could no longer sell it. So, but to put it into, very clear, succinct situations, if you are breached and you need to figure out how much damage or what's happening and how do I need to respond, bringing in the forensics and incident response people is going to cost you about 15 grand. That's not to fix it. That's to figure out what has happened and how do we move forward. All right. So I'll say on the defensive saving, we're going to talk about things like incident response teams and plans, identity and access management. These are all things that you should be doing. If you're doing that, you're going to save big dollars, right? The other thing is the cyber awareness training for your employees. Again, big dollars. All right. Regardless of your business size, if you do those things, it massively helps mitigate. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right. So we're going to get into I'll say this is definitely the ugly. So we're going to get into some of the ugly details of what's happening out on the web and what's happening with the dark ops players is how I like to phrase them. Can we go to the next slide? So first up, let's back up the bus a little bit. I'll say, I'm full of cheeky references. So let's get in the Doc Brown's DeLorean and let's go back to 2019. Just don't go back to 2020, right? Because that was COVID year. We're not going back there, but 2019, we'll go there. So something changed significantly in all of us. I'll say the cyber geeks and propeller heads, we're paying attention. Most of the folks didn't pay attention because if it's not your gig, I got it. But here's the deal. 2019, something changed that was significant. And that was on the dark operator side of this equation of cyber, they started to do things like the IT contractors do, which is these groups are specializing in certain things. All right. So instead of being a player who breaches you and then tries to lock your data and sell your data and do that whole thing from end to end, they started to become specialized specifically. And then they started to offer malware as a service. So what does that mean? Bad operators started offering to other operators, well, you can use the malware that I make to breach people, but you just got to pay me to use my malware, right? And this is the type of stuff that's happening. All right. So then with that invention, and as that shifted, you had a very big, well, they're called big game hunters. So these are cyber crime gangs. They started using those. 23 popped up. They started to move into the data extortion and data leak approach. So in essence, I think a lot of folks have heard of ransomware. So why did it shift to ransomware? Remember the comment I made earlier. These people are not interested in a 9-to-5. They want the maximum cash for the minimum effort, right? So it used to be that if I broke into you, I'd have to steal your data, sneak it out, and then try to monetize it. That's a lot of work. So it's just easier, lock your stuff and make you pay. So I'm going to lock it, and then I'm going to say, you got to pay a ransom to get that back. All right. If you are in the United States, we are attacked the most because we pay the most. And I will tell you, if you survive, remember I said 60% don't survive of small and medium-sized businesses, their first attack. If you survive, I can guarantee you your name as an organization will be leaked on the darknet as one who pays, and they will be back. So if you get a second pass at this, you better make sure you get it right, because they will be back once they know you will pay money. All right. Now, interestingly enough, as the ransomware started to take off, we started to get better at defending against it, which is great. And that's awesome. So we started using things like backups and other strategies so that when you got your files locked, you could just turn around and continue to do business. That's great. But these folks went, nope, if you don't give me money anyway, I'm going to email all of your clients and customers and leak their data. So granted, it's illegal, it's blackmail, but I said again, these folks don't care, and they want maximum cash for minimum effort. So this is the type of mentality that you're actually dealing with if you run into this situation. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so remember I talked about compartmentalizing, kind of like consulting and specialists. We talked about the malware as a service. There's also a group known as access brokers. So what do these people do? Their whole entire focus is to compromise your enterprise, and then they don't ransomware you. They just sell access to your organization. That's what they do. All they do is breach you and set up the ability to go back in at will whenever they want. That's called persistence. All right. So that particular group of, I'll say, you can use as dark consultants, I guess, is maybe a good way to explain it. That has been growing immensely. It has been jumping up year to year. For example, in 2022, there was over 2,500 compromised organizations that their access was up for sale. which means a different dark operator group could come in and start doing what they want in their enterprise. The graph you see on the screen lists a lot of the different actual pillars or industries. The top targets are academia, technology, industrial, and manufacturing. So if you're in those sectors, heads up, might be a target. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, this is where it's going to get, it'll get a little bit more interesting. So first up, we're going to talk about multi-factor authentication. That'll get discussed today. But keep in mind, even with that, you still have to be vigilant because they are finding ways to bypass that. All right, so they are using things like phishing pages and different ways to trick you into getting your credentials and to bypass things like VPNs and Okta and things like that. So short version is definitely need to do multi-factor authentication, but you also have to be vigilant with it. Can we go to the next slide? And this is where I'll say, unfortunately, I didn't grab my Nostradamus hat, which is, kind of my tongue-in-cheek joke there. But so here's what I will say, and beautiful nuclear explosion on screen. But what I bring this up for is two things. One, there's a big misconception. If I migrate my enterprise to the cloud, I don't have to worry about this. Wrong. They are breaching cloud. They are breaching cloud enterprises, and they're finding different ways to do it. They're doing things like, keep this in mind, if you have employees who reuse passwords from their personal accounts to their work accounts, they can cross-correlate that and figure out how to use it to get access. All right, they're good at doing these things. So one, just because you're in cloud enterprise doesn't mean you're immune. You're still going to get attacked and you still have to be vigilant. Two, this is the part where my Nostradamus comes in. I knew, and I frankly did not want to see the day that we would get here, and that is this. The 3 bullet items at the bottom of this slide. And that is, we are now seeing groups, they don't ransomware you, they don't ask for money, they just destroy your data, they destroy your resources, and they basically take your equipment down so that it is not functional. And they're doing, so why are they doing that? So you're probably saying, hey, well, how do they get money for this if they're not going to ransomware you? Well, the short version is, if you're a target for a nation state, there's obvious reasons there is what I would say. But if you're not, and you're just another business, I will tell you, I have been aware of businesses that have paid to have other businesses taken down. All right, so that they can steal your customers or they can buy you out and things like that. So this type of stuff is up for sale on the darknet. Yes, I do research on the darknet, so you see these types of things happening. So short version is, you may not even be dealing with a ransom. You may be dealing with somebody who was already paid by somebody else to take you out. Think of it this way: digital hitmen is probably a good way to explain it. So pretty serious. This is the type of things that is being escalated into. And I'll say, keep that in mind. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, we're going to go through some simple attacks. These are things they've been working for years, but they continue to work, so they keep using them, is what I'll say. So simple thing like shoulder surfing. The interesting vector change on this, I remember we've been talking about this for, I'm sure Dave remembers, we've been talking about this for years, for decades, right? I'm sure we sound like broken records sometimes. Here's the difference. If you're not paying attention, someone can sneak up behind you and record with their phone the video of you typing in your password on your keyboard. A little bit different, but now I can replay it when I need to. Here's the one, this is interesting. This is a good example of the mentality of exploitation and how they try to use your kindness against you. So if I'm a bad guy, let's say I come into your place of business, I talk to you, whatever, and I leave a USB on your counter and walk out, or I drop it on the sidewalk as I exit your business. You come out and you go, oh my God, one of my customers or somebody lost their USB and I'd like to try to get it back to them. So you pick that up, you walk it in, you plug it into your computer. And when you do that, the malware I had on it auto loads and breaches you. All right. So this is you have to be vigilant. You got to make sure that if you're going to do those types of things, you run it on an appropriate machine that's not going to cause a compromise. Next up is, let's say, some of my favorites is rogue Wi-Fi devices. I've actually seen these things. You have to remember there's things like little credit card sized computers like the Raspberry Pi now that I can sneak into your business and you'll never see it. All right. So these types of things can be powered in different ways. But short version is we set it up. we make it look like it's a valid network, a wireless network, and somebody connects to it and they think it's your business or it's a valid Wi-Fi. And then when it actually asks you to log in with your user ID and password, I, of course, harvest that and then use that to try to attack you later. So have to be careful for that. And then next up is parking lot attacks. So what is this? This is where, like, I pull up, I sit in the parking lot with a laptop for, I'll say, for reference. Now I will, disclaimer, we set up networks at the college to teach people how to do breaches and how to defend. I have repeatedly shown that with a really bad Wi-Fi setup and configuration, you can breach in 30 to 60 seconds, depending on the network and config. So it can be bad and it can be quick, okay? Now, parking lot is, I sit with a laptop out in your parking lot and I try to breach from there. The one thing I would say that I'm starting to see information on, and as a cyber researcher, I'm paying attention to is, I'll say I have seen where there have been some, they're not widespread yet, but I think this is probably going to grow in time, is people use drones to actually deliver one of these small devices, drop it on your roof. I can power it in different ways, and I can use the cellular network to try to run attacks to breach your Wi-Fi. And if you never go up on the roof and see that thing, you never know I'm still trying to beat my way into your network. So once I get in, I can do what I want. So these are the types of things you got to be careful about and things you want to pay attention to. But these are simple attacks, and they continue to use them because they're effective. All right. And people don't really defend well against them. Next up. So if you see this, you're going to have a bad day. That's I'll say the bad news here is you're going to have a bad day. The little guy with the key, give me the money or you're not getting your stuff back. That's what it's saying. And with the 16 days, 13 hours, and 19 minutes to your files being published, so everybody knows that you got demolished and you got taken over. So this is not what you want to have happen. You want to avoid this through positioning correctly. Can we go to the next slide? And I think hopefully at this point, you're starting to say, hey, wow, it's really that bad. Okay, well, what can we do about it? So now I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and he's going to talk to you about what can you do about it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Doctor. It was a great summary. Fantastic. Cyber's continuously evolving. I think Dr. Dave touched on that, like a few of the things that we've been seeing for 10 to 15 years, right, have now evolved and they've gotten better at them, and they're leveraging new tactics, right? So as we protect ourselves, they have new tactics. So we like to talk about cyber. It's almost like a chronic disease. So it's like diabetes, right? You have diabetes, you have it for your whole life, but you can manage it, right? With the proper medication, you can manage it. You can mitigate the risk of it having a serious outcome for you. That's the same thing we need to do with cybersecurity. We need to have a plan in place. We need to be monitoring things, and we'll get into kind of what you can do to protect your business. And we'll get into a little bit about what you can do to protect your family, because we're all online now. So it's not just at work, it's also when we're outside of work. So let's jump into it. First thing is you need to know what you own. For you business owners out there, you need to have an inventory, right? We need to know what software we have, what hardware we have, what are our employees logging into, and we need to be able to, we can't protect it if we don't know we have it, right? So if you have a small, maybe you have 40 to 50 employees, and do you know what your folks in accounting are using, what software they're using? Is that in your inventory, right? These are the ways that we inadvertently have breaches, by not knowing what we have and not implementing the right policy around that to protect that. 2, know what is vulnerable. So we need to have a mechanism in place whereby once we know what we have, right, how are we alerted when something needs to be patched, right? When there is a vulnerability on something. So if you take the example that Dr. Dave talked about with the person in the parking lot, doing Wi-Fi sniffing, like looking for Wi-Fi openings, a lot of times what they're looking for is, you never change the name on your Wi-Fi router, so it's still the manufacturer's name, right? So let's say it's a Cisco 123 router, Cisco small business router. That router has a known vulnerability on it, and you don't know about it. Your parking lot looking, they're like, oh, I found one of these. I'm going to go attack this one, right? So you need to be alerted so that when these vulnerabilities are out there, so you can get them remediated, get them patched, and keep your business safe. Risk mitigation approach. At SensCy, we use NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We walk our clients through the 5 pillars of NIST, which is you first need to identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. So a good cyber program, you're doing something in each one of these areas, right? And you build that program out, and we'll talk about some of the things in a minute here that fall under those categories. Communication plan is really important. What are we going to do if we have an incident, right? We're not going to be able to talk to each other the way that we normally do. Our systems are going to be down, right? So we have to be planning in advance. How are we going to respond to the incident? How are we going to talk to each other? And then day-to-day approach, right? Are we communicating with each other about cyber? Are we giving briefings to our executives, right? Do they know what's going on? Are our employees being trained, right? And are we confirming that they're doing the training, that they're aware of these threats, right? So communication cyber is key. It's a team sport. It crosses all parts of the organization. Breach detection. We need to have a process in place to know if something's going on. And then monitoring our risk posture. So I kind of mentioned this at the beginning, right? You need to have consistent monitoring. You can think of it as sort of like a chronic disease. It's the best way to describe it. And there are things you can do to mitigate that risk and make it very much less likely that you're going to become a victim, but you have to continuously do them. All right. 88% of cyber attacks can be avoided with the proper cyber hygiene. It's crazy that it's still like this. This has been between 80 and 90% for probably 15 years. This number came out of a Stanford study from last year. So what does that mean? It just means we're not doing the basics. So I'm going to talk to you about the basics and the basics that you should be doing. And because we're not doing the basics, somebody inadvertently inside of our company makes a mistake, and that's what allows the bad guys in. Couple of things about our philosophy and how we like to talk to prospects and clients about cybersecurity is, look, when cyber people get together, if Dave and I get together and go have a beer, we're going to talk. There's going to be 43 acronyms thrown out in the first 2 minutes of us talking to each other, right? Because cyber's full of acronyms. So we need to make these things understandable to business owners. It's on us to do that. And we need to provide solutions in plain language and not, talk in a foreign language, which oftentimes cybersecurity can seem like a foreign language. It really requires a holistic approach. I talked about this already a little bit. We need to be doing things in each one of these 5 pillars. So we need to be identifying things. We need to have a protection plan in place. We need to be ongoing detection, and we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared to respond and recover should an incident occur. At SensCy, we believe, especially for small business owners, that it really requires a personal touch. So we provide a cyber advocate to each one of our clients, right? And then that personal touch plus visibility into your cyber health. So having a plan and working the plan, right? Being consistent. That's what leads to an active cybersecurity culture. And an active cybersecurity culture is really better protected, better prepared, and able to recover and stay in business. So you won't become one of those 60% that Dr. Dave mentioned, right? That's the goal. And it doesn't have to be difficult, and it doesn't have to be expensive. So let's talk about what are some things you should be doing right now to protect your company. And if you're not doing any of these things or some of these things, you really need to pay attention and start to think about doing them, because these are the most likely causes of either an incident happening or a protracted, very expensive recovery. So we need to start with the basics, both professionally and personally. So what are the basics? Strong passwords, right? We need to have a password policy in place on each of our systems. So whether it be our email or our Zoom account or whatever things we use to function on our day-to-day business, there needs to be a password policy in place that involves strong, complex passwords, and that employees understand not to be reusing passwords, not to use the same password on their personal accounts as they do on their work accounts. Because if that personal account gets breached, it's very easy for me as a threat actor to go find your employees on LinkedIn, and it's going to be easy for me to figure out their email address, right? It's like Dave Kelly at SensCy, Kelly Dave at SensCy, D Kelly at SensCy, or it's be something like this. And bam, if I have the right password, now I'm into your systems. Reuse, well, I just mentioned that actually. So don't reuse passwords. You have a policy around that. You need to have training and awareness for your employees so they know why they shouldn't be doing these things, right? And then password managers have become very affordable. We recommend them to our clients because we all have hundreds of passwords now, right? And that's part of the reason why we reuse them or we change a couple of digits. And this is what the bad guys exploit, right? It's just human nature, human behavior. We don't have the memories to remember these things. So password managers create random passwords for you, remember them for you. If you use a browser-based one, it'll even help you log in. So it makes that process more convenient and also more secure. Cybersecurity awareness training, if there's one thing you take away from this presentation, it's this. You should be doing it now. If you're not, start tomorrow. Find somebody to help you do persistent and consistent cyber awareness training and simulated phishing attacks on your employees. Because we need our employees should become right now, our employees are our biggest vulnerability, and we want them to be our first line of defense. Trained employees can be our first line of defense. They'll recognize things that through their training and not make those critical mistakes that can cause us to have an incident. I can tell you a quick, actually, before I move on to this one, I'll tell you a quick story about some awareness training. So we have a client. We did an awareness training on something called a business email compromise. So very recently, we've seen an increase in this type of attack. And basically what happens is, well, let me tell you the story about the client first, and we'll work backwards. So the client calls and says, hey, I think your training just saved me several $100,000. And he goes on to explain that he received an email from his vendor. He had reached out to his vendor and said, hey, I'm about to pay this invoice. It's a large invoice. I just wanted to make sure your banking information is the same. We haven't had contact in a while. Want to make sure everything's good. Vendor replies, says, hey, great. We're looking forward to it. Thanks for reaching out. Oh, by the way, our banking information has changed. Here's our new banking information. So he looks at that email. He went through our training. So he clicks on the email address and looks at it and says, yep, that's their actual email address. It's coming from their actual domain. Then he goes down and he looks at the signature line and he goes to his database to look up the phone number. And he realizes the signature line looks the same, but the phone number that's on the email is different than the phone number he has for the vendor. So he calls the vendor phone number from his database. Hey, did your banking information actually change? The vendor says, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. So what happened? A threat actor had got inside this Outlook system and was just sitting there squatting. Wasn't doing anything, didn't steal any data, didn't do anything, just sat there, waited for some event like this to happen. When our client reached out and said, hey, I've got an invoice to pay, that threat actor took that email thread and moved it to something called the RSS feed, which is something that none of us look at. Most of us don't even know it's in our email. So it's not in our little side window on the side where we can see it, right? And then he started acting as the vendor, communicating with our client, saying, yeah, my banking information's changed. So from our guy's perspective, it looked like a legitimate email, right? It came from this person's email address. So because we trained him on what to look for, he was able to not only save that money and that wire transfer, but also alert his vendor like, hey, you got a cyber incident going on right now that you need to take care of. So this is how training can greatly help you. Regular backups, Dr. Dave touched on this, like, hey, the first thing we need to do is make sure that we have our backups set up in a proper way. They're not on the same network as our production system. They're segregated, or they're in a cloud instance designed specifically for backing up data, because at least that allows us to recover and hopefully stay in business should an incident occur. Patching, if somebody's sending you a notification that there's a security update, I just want you to understand what that means. It means that they've already determined that somebody's breached this part of their software. So we're always behind. When a security update comes out, it means that the bad guys have already found an exploitation, right? And the software company's now scrambling to like close that loophole. So we're already behind. So it's really important to install those as soon as they come out. We recommend within 24 to 48 hours. Contact organizations directly when asked to change any financial data or provide any personal data. That's the story I just told, right? Use your internal contact information to verify, not what's in the email. They'll make everything look perfect and they'll just change the phone number. So when you call, you'll actually be talking to the bad guy if you follow the instructions in the email. So always use your independently check this contact information. All right. Multi-factor authentication. I can't believe I'm still telling everyone this, but do this everywhere. So why? It's something we know and something we own, right? So let's talk about our previous example. If my employee's reusing their passwords, right? And I'm a threat actor and I find, okay, I'm like, okay, so his email is davekelly@sensci.com. Oh, I'm in, right? But if I have multi-factor authentication, that's a second layer of protection. So something I know is my password, right? Because I know my password, and something I own is a device, like my mobile device, my iPad, right? So it creates that secondary step where that person now has gotten my email, my password, right? So they go to log in, but then a notification comes to my phone or my personal device saying, hey, someone's trying to log in. Here's a code. And I'll know immediately, well, wait a minute, I wasn't trying to log in. Something must be wrong, right? So enable that everywhere. It's free on a lot of individual applications, right? And if you have a need, you may have a need to deploy it through your enterprise, depending on how big you are. Virtual private network, if you have folks working from home, if you have salespeople that travel, right, or working from hotels and other places where there's open internet, please install a VPN. So what a VPN does, a virtual private network, is it just whenever you go out, whenever you're remote, right, and you're on a device and you go out to your work environment, right, you're traveling across the open internet, which means things are visible to people that know what they're doing. So what a VPN does is it creates a secure tunnel, encrypts the information first, and then creates a secure tunnel, so two layers of protection. So when that information is traveling from one point to another, it's in a secured tunnel and it's also encrypted, right? So if your employees join the free hotel Wi-Fi, which we always said, please don't ever do that, right? At least if they have a VPN, they're going to be much more secure. Be vigilant with links and attachments. This is part of awareness training, right? It's something that we cover with our clients pretty consistently when we send them awareness training videos. We show them what to look for. Um, but hover over email addresses, make sure it looks legit. You know, if you get an email, like on a personal level, if you get an email from Netflix saying, hey, you haven't paid your bill, your account's about to be suspended, click here to log in. Hover over that email address and see, is it actually coming from @netflix.com or is it coming from somewhere else? Do the same thing with any links. Hover over them, make sure they look legit. Anti-malware, antivirus. I think what we most of the time see with smaller businesses is they bought it and it's not updated on all their machines, right? So it expired on somebody's laptop. You didn't know it. So this goes back to kind of knowing what we have, having an inventory, monitoring that inventory, making sure we know we're kind of monitoring our health, right? Our cyber health. Incident response plan. A good incident response plan should be a step-by-step plan, right? When you're in the middle of an incident, but when I was at running cyber command for the state, we had anonymous come after us, right? At one point, and it was luckily we had a good plan in place. But I can tell you when something like that happens, your hair's gonna be on fire. You're gonna be running around and trying to just like, what do I do next? And if you have a plan that walks you through it, particularly if you're not a technical person, it's gonna save you a significant amount of time. It's gonna help you with to make the right decisions and not make the wrong decisions that can lead to, if you make the wrong decision during a cyber attack, it can either increase your expense of recovering significantly, or you could potentially accidentally remove data that that prevents us from determining what happened, right? And if we can't determine what happened and you come back up, you could be facing another incident almost immediately. So a good plan will walk you through what you're supposed to do. As a business leader, it'll also include questions that you should be asking your employees, right? So you're gathering information at each stage of the event so that when resources come to help you, you have answers for them, which will shortcut your time to recovery. And then lastly, it should also include crisis communication templates. What do I say to my employees? What do I say to my customers, right? You should have that stuff in the plan, ready to go, reviewed by legal. So you can just give it to HR and boom, send it out, right? So you don't have to sit there and try to write that in the middle of a very bad day or week. All right, and then you can reach out to SensCy. We offer all of these things in a package. So if you're concerned about it and want to talk more, I know Eric Kirkus reached out to you guys ahead of the webinar and thanked you for joining. I'm sure he'll be following up with you after the webinar. If you have any follow-up questions or just want to learn more, Eric will definitely reach out to you. So now let's talk a little bit about how you protect yourself and your family, right? We think this is really important. We're all online. We have kids that are online. Some of us aren't technical. Our kids are probably all more technical than us. I think even my 12-year-old's more technical than me, and I consider myself technical. So it's crazy what they know, right? Because they've been doing this stuff since birth, right? Practically. So let's talk about a few things you can do. Purchase a credit protection service. There was a cyber breach in I believe Dallas, the city of Dallas, like their Health and Human Service Agency, and they got a lot of kids' social security numbers out of that breach. The problem with that is they'll use those social security numbers to open up credit accounts. And what'll happen is your child will turn 18, right? Or whenever they're going to go buy their first car, whatever the case might be. And they'll say they have a 100 credit score with all of these collections and all this stuff on there, right? Because someone stole their social security number and opened up accounts. So this is happening more and more. So we internally use some of these services. I'm just throwing up ones that we use, right? That somebody on our company uses. But what a LifeLock or an Experian credit service does is it locks down your credit. You can do family plans. And these family plans cost about $200 a year. Definitely worth doing. Password manager. I mentioned a password manager previously that we recommend them to be deployed at the workplace, but even at home, right? We have lots of passwords we're trying to remember. Our kids could be a breach point for us now because they're on our networks. So we should be investing in these password managers, getting impossible to remember all these passwords. And if you want to have a complex password with multiple characters and a different one for every website you log into, right? Really critical. About $80 a year, you can get a family plan where everybody gets to use it. Talk about this a little bit for work, but same thing at home. Install multi-factor authentication wherever possible. It should be on all of your email for sure. And that's the first place you need to start. But anything that you log into, your banking information, enable that two-factor authentication. Secure your home Wi-Fi. You know, a little sticker on the bottom of your Wi-Fi that has the password on it. Change that. Change that right away. We know that at least the installer knows it, right? And who knows who else in that supply chain of that router knows that password, right? So change the password. Change the name. Make sure the name isn't the name of the router, the model number or the make. And also make sure it's not anything that identifies you, right? So don't put your name in there. Shouldn't put your company name in there. We don't want to like let people know any information about us, right? Because they can look at it and you've been on your phone, right, and went to try to find Wi-Fi, and how many routers do you see out there, right? So if you put something that points to your company name, that could make a threat actor go, huh, I might want to focus on this one, right? This is a company, they might have some data. Upgrade your devices regularly. So turn on auto updates. You can do that for all of your Windows products. You can do it for your Apple products. You can do it for Google. So do it. It doesn't, I want to say one thing about it. It doesn't always happen, right? So you still need to check, right? Turn on auto updates, but trust but verify, right? Make sure it's updating because every once in a while, your computer will be on for too long or something and it won't push that update. So trust but verify. Use biometrics whenever possible. So on mobile devices, laptops. That way, if someone gets your device or you lose it, right, it's less of a threat. They're not going to have they're going to have a hard time accessing it. And if they can access it, they're probably going to have to brick it, which means all your data is going to be gone anyway. And then use a VPN. So we talked about a VPN. It's a virtual private network, right? So if you're at home, especially if you're working from home, invest in a VPN. It not only protects your information, but if you do have to access work stuff from home, it's providing you an additional level of protection on your work environment as well. And then lastly, back up your data. I mean, I think nowadays, like we all have phones and we have all of our photos, like our whole life is like in our personal devices now, right? Pretty much. We don't really have photo albums and things like that anymore. So just imagine if you lost all of that, or some of you maybe, prolific on social media. Imagine you lost access to that account, all the followers you've built up over time, right? So back up your information. You can use iCloud, you can use Google Drive, you can use a secure portable storage device, but make sure you're backing up your data. So if something does happen to you at home, you can recover some of that information that might be precious to you. All right, helpful resources. If you reach out to Eric or respond to Eric when he reaches out to you, he can send you a copy of this deck if you're interested. So I won't go over every single one of these, but SensCy offers a free cyber brief that you can subscribe to over on LinkedIn. There's several sites like this, like Have I Been Pawned is a very common one where you can check and see if your email address has been involved in a data breach. Important to know that, right? So you need to change passwords and so on and so forth. And then some of these other ones are more targeted to small businesses, like the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency has a really nice sort of page, a couple pages actually for small businesses that go into a little bit more detail on what I just described. Like, hey, if you're a small business, you should be doing at a minimum these things, right? And doing something, I think as Dr. Dave described earlier, these attackers are criminals, right? They're lazy, so they're going for the lowest hanging fruit. So if you've got some things in place, right? From a good cybersecurity strategy, the more things you put in place, the less likely they are to get you because they just go after somebody who's doing less than you. So it's not like you have to do everything all at once. You should have a strategy in place and be incrementally increasing your posture, right? All right. Lastly, if you're interested, for everybody who's attending this webinar, SensCy does what we call a cyber health assessment, right? So it's an online assessment. It occurs inside our software portal. You can join a call with Eric or one of our other members, and we'll walk you through. It takes 30 minutes. It's based on the National Institute of Standards and Technology platform. So we're going to cover things in each of those 5 pillars that I mentioned before. So identify, detect, protect, respond, recover. And at the end of that, it's going to give you a score. And the nice thing about the way we've calibrated the score is you don't even know anything about cyber to know how you're doing, because we calibrated it like your credit score, right? So everybody knows, hey, if I have an 800 credit score, that's top-notch credit. I can get the best interest rates. I can go get a car, a house, whatever, right? As I start to fall below 800, either my interest rates go up, or if I get into the 500s, 600s, I may not be able to get financed at all, right? So it gives you a good perspective of where you are by thinking, okay, if this were my credit score, how would I be doing in cyber? So we're offering that free to everyone who joined the webinar. You can scan the QR code there. It'll take you right to the site. You can type in SensCy score, SensCy.com/SensCy-score. I'll also take you there. We have 2 ways to do it. You can get an appointment and we'll walk you through it, or you can do a self-assessment. And they're both on the site. And the self-assessment will spit out the score for you. If you join with one of our cyber experts on a call, you'll get an actual 1-page report that gives you a little bit more context. So please sign up. Please take us up on our offer. No obligation. The first step to improving is just knowing where you stand. And with that, I turn it back over to Dave to talk a little bit about, if you want to learn more about cybersecurity, if that's your interest and that's why you joined today, I'll turn over to Dave to talk a little bit about Walsh's program.
Yeah, I'll say I'll quickly go through this. So one, we're particularly proud of our programs. Walsh College has been a national security agency, center of academic excellence since the early 2000s, and we've maintained that. There's every cycle, every 5 years, we have to prove we're still meeting standards on that. So very proud to continue to maintain that. So we also have programs that are nationally ranked. I'm not going to read through each one of them, but we're proud of those as well, including our information technology and cyber programs. And in general, if you're looking for those, we do teach. I'll say most colleges and universities tend to focus on theory. We teach you theory, but we also back that up with a lot of hands-on. So you're going to learn hands-on skills and competencies so that you can land in the workforce and be super effective. All right. So if you are I'll say a business that, you have some needs for some internships and things like that, we have plenty of folks looking for IT, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and analytics style internships. So if you're interested in that, please reach out. Or if you're like, hey, I'm in IT, I want to polish up some skills and get refreshed up. It's been a few years. We have professional development as well. So those are all Those are all options. All of our professors are, as I like to say at the beginning, are not typical academics. A lot of them are, well, all of them are industry professionals or were before they moved into academia. And I'll say, I have a running joke with our chief operating officer. He had said he said Walsh is everywhere, and I said, what do you mean everywhere? And then here we have this picture of Walsh College, best business and technology degrees. So I'll say that's why. So in that particular question, why are we the best? I think we're the best because we're nationally ranked. We do things differently, and everything is applied knowledge that we're working on teaching. So I'll stop there. Otherwise, I'll just keep going, Dave.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I actually should have mentioned this earlier. I'm going to hand off to Reagan here. We do have a drawing, and somebody did win a Theragun massage gun, which I understand is actually one of the nicer ones out there. So maybe I'll hand off to Reagan. Or wait, actually, should we do questions first? Reagan, what should
Yes, well, let's announce the winner and then we can jump into some questions. So, Laura Fiorenza, you are the winner of a brand new Theragun. I'm actually struggling with some runner's knee right now, and I really wish I could I had a Theragun for myself to use. So, hope that you enjoy using it, and we'll follow up with you to get that delivered to you. All right, and then we'll jump into some questions. So we have a question from a business leader in the chat. They said that they are president of a small organization and they're wondering who should be responsible for cybersecurity, if it's their IT people or somebody else at their organization.
Yeah, I can take that one. So it's first of all important to know that while IT and cybersecurity are related, they're actually separate fields, right? So when you're a traditional IT professional, your job is to do what? Make sure the business is running, make sure things are operational, make sure the employees have the tools they need, make sure we don't have downtime, those types of things. Make sure we're backing up. Now we talk about backups, right? There's an overlapping processes that need to happen that overlap IT and cybersecurity. So that's the first thing you need to understand. So what we see, I'll tell you what we see with most small businesses. The best way to do this, if you're small, is to have somebody on the leadership team that has oversight, right? And then somebody on your IT team that's working with a partner like SensCy on just cybersecurity, right? And being a guide and helping that IT person on the security side of things. That's the model that we've seen work the best. Or maybe you have a small managed service provider, right? But somebody on that leadership team needs to be engaged, needs to understand what we're doing at a high level, needs to understand what our plan is, right? What our risks are, right? So you need to sign somebody first from the leadership team to be that point of contact, right? Before you go down and say, okay, now who's going to start implementing things and what are we going to do on the implementation side? Does that make sense? And Dave, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. You need somebody on that top leadership team that is invested in is focusing on this at least on some level, to make sure that. So I mean, it's risk management, and cyber is another risk, just like a supply chain risk or a financial risk. It needs to be viewed in that manner. So someone on that top team needs to be at least focusing on it some.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you both. We have another question here. It's asking what the professional development sessions cost, and I'm assuming that they're referring to our employee awareness training. So I'll hand that over to you, Dave.
Yeah, so if you're talking about the cybersecurity awareness training, it really depends on, so we have a full package solution. So I mentioned earlier, we provide you with a cyber advocate. We'll initially start off by doing your SensCy score. Then we'll build a cyber health plan for you, and we'll provide cybersecurity awareness training, phishing exercises. We'll be doing scanning, and there's a whole package of things that we'll do for you. And just to give you an idea of sort of pricing around that entire package, if you're 20 or under employees, it's total cost is about $750 per month. And then it kind of goes up from there depending on how many employees you have. And there are some opportunities depending upon how large you are, particularly if you're a little bit larger, where you just want that your only gap you feel is like awareness training and phishing exercises, we can work something out if you're already scoring high enough on our scale, right? And that's kind of your gap. So.
Awesome. Thanks. We have one more question here. I'm assuming it's coming from a kind of cybersecurity consultant point of view. And they're saying that many individuals are hesitant to use MFA or a VPN if their organizations don't seem to be requiring it, if it's a choice. Do you have any thoughts there on how to get people to really take the action to implementing those things, especially when it's like their individual security, or like maybe people who are working from home and their organization doesn't require a VPN?
Yeah, well, I'll jump in, Dave, and then you can jump in after that, I guess. What I would say is the story is always the same. Nobody sees value in embracing security. They kind of see it as red tape until they have the breach or until they have problems. I'll say as a cybersecurity professional, I've seen individuals, I've seen extended family who've had to deal with accounts being taken over and things like that, and it's problematic. The minute you lose access or you get a bank account cleaned out, you'll quickly want to make sure you have multi-factor authentication on. The short version is, my comment is spend the time now, even if it feels like a little bit of a nuisance, to avoid that problem long term. Because if you talk to anybody who's had the problem, they will tell you it's absolutely 100% worth going through it, is setting up multi-factor and using it to avoid what they've had to go through. That's what I would say at this point. Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Don't fall into the trap of, well, my company doesn't require it, so I must not need it. Quite frankly, it just might be that your company's not security conscious. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't be, right? You're working from home, you have your own stuff to protect, right? You have your own home network, you have your own things that, if you think about our houses nowadays, I mean, we've got doorbells, security cameras, all kinds of things that are connected to the internet, right? You don't want somebody taking control of those things, right? So protect yourself first, and hopefully your companies will catch up and start protecting you as well.
Awesome. And I see we actually have Julie with her hand. Oh, never mind. Hand went down. All right. So I think that takes care of all of our questions here. So we'll wrap up here. Thank you both so much for leading us through this cybersecurity crash course today. And thank you everyone for attending. And we'll follow up with everyone to make sure that you all have all your cyber questions answered and all the tools that you need. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Dr. Dave. See you guys.